Hello, thanks for joining us. We've made this clip to complement the mental health guide for schools. Guide has become really popular with schools who are trying to have a systematic approach to mental health needs. My name is Gabrielle Rolls. I'm the training manager at Boing Boing, and I come from a background of 18 years in schools. And this is my colleague Vicky.
Hello, my name is Vicky Dunham. I'm a practice development lead at Boing Boing. I'm a proud co-leader of Blackpool's Resilience Revolution. So young people's mental health, first of all, is increasingly on the agenda, and we know that that can feel really daunting for schools who already feel as though they've got enough to do just purely by educating children. However, it's worth remembering that this emphasis on mental health and well-being gives credibility to what we've really always known, and that's that pupils learn best when they have positive mental health, and that therefore schools need to look after the whole child. So the guide is designed for any school staff who is either concerned about a child or young person's mental health or is committed to developing a whole school approach to mental health and emotional well-being in your school. And the guides are based on, the guides look at mental health through a resilience-based approach. So the Boing Boing resilience-based approach, for people that aren't too familiar with it, looks at mental health through a social justice lens. We understand adversity impacts on children and young people's mental health, and so we not only look to support the individual child with the mental health, which we call beating the odds, but we also look at challenging the cause of the adversity that's causing that distress in the first place, and we call that changing the odds. So the guide was originally co-produced by Boing Boing and young people and teachers and mental health practitioners in East Sussex. So the adaptation that you're seeing on the screen now is a version of the original guide, and this has been co-produced with our partners from Blackpool's Resilience Revolution. So the Resilience Revolution, if you haven't heard of that before, is funded by the Big Lottery Community Fund, and it's the world's first whole town approach to resilience. So we've got the guide, and then we've got the COVID-19 supplement, where we've added some additional kind of thoughts and recommendations and hints and tips to manage the challenges that we've faced during the COVID pandemic. So you can read the whole guide, or you can just read sections that are relevant to you at a particular time. So we're going to introduce you to the different sections. So here's the structure of the guide. Section 1 is school statutory responsibility. Section 2 is the academic resilience approach. Section 3 is individual mental health issues. Section 4 is co-producing solutions, and appendices and further reading you'll find in Section 5.
Thank you, Vicky. So now we're going to go through the different sections and look at them in more detail to see where you can get the information that you need. Section 1 clearly outlines the school's statutory responsibilities. In other words, by law, what the school needs to be doing to support a young person's mental health and emotional well-being. This should be useful in your planning to see what you've already done and perhaps identifying some gaps. The other thing is that this section does is looks at Ofsted, and under the new framework, the type of things that Ofsted is looking for. So again, you can look at this and it will help you to identify, if you have an inspection, specifically what you're doing in relation to what Ofsted is looking for, and then you can very clearly report back on that. Moving on to section 2. This section really starts honing in on the idea of resilience. It starts by looking at resilience in terms of the evidence around it. And it's worth remembering that although this is a guide for schools, the resilience evidence base comes from worldwide studies. It comes from speaking to practitioners and school staff and families with a lived experience. So it's very strongly evidence-based. If you look at section 2 and you look at what we call the socio-ecological approach, you'll see that supporting young people's resilience is about looking wider than just the individuals. So the type of things which impact on somebody's ability to behave resiliently are dynamic, and they involve going wider than their family, even looking at their environment and the systems around them. So if in terms of us thinking about it as a school, it's a really good idea to work wider than just working with that young person and to think about what you can do to support their wider environment. In section 2, there's also a spotlight on young refugees who we think are particularly vulnerable at this moment, and you could focus in on things to support their mental health. So in section 2, you're learning about the benefits of having a whole school approach to mental health and resilience rather than just a narrow focus on it with just a few people involved. And what you'd need to do in order to saturate your environment, but looking at specifically your own context and your own resources. Now, Boing Boing has developed the academic resilience approach, which takes some of the evidence around resilience and puts it into a practical approach based on your context about the type of things you can do. The idea is that it's a whole school approach so that resilience becomes everybody's business. In this section, you'll find the resilience framework, this version. I've got a version behind me. The version you can see on the screen was developed by some pupils at a school in Blackpool and is particularly user-friendly. You'll see at the bottom there that there are the noble truths, which are the key principles which will help you with your planning in terms of how you're going to saturate the environment with resilience. And you also have 42 different components, the type of things you can do to ensure there are opportunities to promote resilience across your school. There's also a really handy table in section 2, which looks at the idea of whole school resilience and the type of things you need to do practically to make sure that you embed it across your whole school culture.
So moving on to section 3. Section 3 provides some practical information about how school staff can recognise, can understand and can respond to individual children and young people who might be experiencing some common mental health difficulties or what we think of as symptoms of distress. So these are anxiety, low mood, eating difficulties, self-harm, attention difficulties, behaviour difficulties, post-traumatic stress and attachment difficulties. So this section looks at some common challenges associated with these common mental health issues. So for example, a child who might be experiencing anxiety might be struggling to actually get into school. A child with low mood might be experiencing social isolation. A member of school staff might experience a disclosure of self-harm. And this section offers some practical hints and tips to school staff in how best to support that child or young person. So school staff often see children and young people on a daily basis and therefore are in a really valuable role and have a massive opportunity to build trusting relationships and offer regular and consistent support to enable children and young people to manage any mental health difficulties they might be experiencing. So in Boing Boing, we call that embedded therapy, and because it's the everyday interactions that can make the most difference. So in this section, under these common mental health issues, we also signpost you to further reading and to useful websites in case you need further information. So section 3 also details how you can use resilient moves from the resilient framework to support the wider school community, and it looks at other considerations when supporting children and young people with their mental health, such as confidentiality, ways to start a conversation, some hints and tips in communication skills, social media and how social media might impact on children and young people's mental health, the importance of working with parents, and also when and how to make a referral to external services. Section 4 of the guide looks at co-production. So co-production is a fundamental principle of Blackpool's resilience revolution and also Boing Boing's approach to resilience. So co-production is based on the values and on the understanding that children, young people and parents are assets and they've got vital information and knowledge and skills that contribute to making positive change within school systems. So also another thing that we know from research is that children and young people who are involved in co-production have a sense of empowerment and have a sense of being valued that contributes to positive mental health and emotional well-being in itself. So there are many examples of how co-production has become embedded into schools in Blackpool. For example, many schools have developed student resilience committees, and these are cited. These examples you'll find in section 4.
Thank you, Vicky. So that takes us to the end of the sections, except the references section. Now, usually I glide over the references, but my top tip is to make sure that you put some focus into looking at the references because there's some really interesting additional reading to do. And also we have the appendices in this section, and the appendices can give you more information, for instance, explaining about how the resilience framework was made, some more information about the noble truths. And there you see Bronfenbrenner's socio-ecological approach and more details about that. You can also find in the appendices section some a tool to help you with assessing the risk of self-harm, and you can find a lesson plan to teach about loneliness. So hopefully you'll find that useful. Thanks very much for listening to this guide about how to use the school's mental health guide.
So if you have any queries, if you'd like to order some more copies of your guides, if you've got any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to email us. So I'm Vicky at Boing Boing. I'm Blackpool based, or Gabrielle, who is based down in Brighton. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.